Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are listening to The Nick and Joe Show, coming to you live from the Think Radio Broadcast Center in Canada's national capital. At least half of us are coming to you live from the Think Radio Broadcast Center. The other half of us are coming to you from our studio in, it's actually not our studio, in Killaloe, Ontario. Nick, are you there?
I certainly am.
Okay. We're getting a lot of echoing there, Nick. You got to turn that volume down.
Okay, let me take this down there. How's that?
I don't know. Oh, that's
well. There's no more squealing and echoing on this end.
Okay, that sounds good. Anyway, how are you doing out there, Nick, tonight?
It was a gorgeous day out here today. I mean, just beautiful. I actually spent some time making my grass go backwards and shrink into the ground. I used a mechanical device called lawnmower for that. And I got most of it done. I still have a little to do, but boy, I'll tell you, it was something else. The weather was just amazing.
Now, I recall as a young lad using a lawn roller.
Yep.
What in heaven's name would I have to use a lawn roller for? What was the purpose of that?
You did that in the springtime when the ground was soft, and it took a lot of the lumps and bumps out of the lawn.
Really?
Yeah, you'd fill it with water.
Yes.
And it probably weighed 400 or 500 pounds.
That would be about right.
Yep. Now, if you're lucky, in my day, you had a little garden tractor to pull it with. Otherwise, you were the mule.
Well, tractor or no tractor, Nick, I was always the mule.
No, that was... we didn't do that too much when I was growing up as a kid because we had an acre of grass, but Dad never had any time to do anything with it. So he just looked at me and said, "It's too long," which meant I had to get the old 3.5 horse Briggs & Stratton lawnmower out and put it to work.
It's interesting because we only used it. We lived in the city for a short period of time and had a very small lawn. Which, when you're a youngster, seems to be much bigger than it actually is. But the point is that it was pretty small, and of course I recall doing that rolling, and then only as I got older, asking myself, as we weren't doing it anymore because we moved out to the country and had a lot of land, so nobody ever did any of that stuff. But it just, as I got older, I thought back on it, and it didn't make any sense. And it's got to be. It's years, even possibly decades, since I've even thought about that. But it just all of a sudden, I had this vision in my mind when you were talking about not just mowing the grass, but, causing it to go backwards and all that stuff, or however you described it. So, yeah, so that was the purpose, to get rid of all those bumps and bruises in the ground.
Yeah, that's right, because the winter would heave the frost, or the frost would heave the ground, and you'd get ridges and rolls and bumps and all that stuff. And when the ground is soft, you can pack it back down again. And it paid off for the rest of the summer. It was much easier to walk on without tripping and falling and breaking your nose. But outside of that, that's the main reason for it.
Okay, well, let's get this show started. So before we go any further, if you're listening to the show live on the internet, just want to remind you that you can participate in our live chat on the internet. All you have to do is click on the live chat button. Well, actually, it's just the chat or the comment bubble in the player, and register if you have to register. If you're already registered, you may have to sign in. One way or the other, that's to make sure that you're a real flesh and blood human being. If you're listening to the podcast later on, which is a rebroadcast, you can still leave comments the same way. If you're listening to the show live over terrestrial radio, a regular radio station, AM, FM, well, then you won't be able to leave a live comment. But help is coming, because sometime in the next few weeks, we will be starting to take calls live. So you'll be able to call us from your car phone or from your living room or from your kitchen, or, you could even call us if you have your smartphone with you, your cell phone with you. You could call us from the bathroom.
We don't want to know that, though. No.
We don't need to know
that. You can keep to yourself.
Yeah. Well, the point being that we just want to make it as convenient as possible for you to give us your views on what we're talking about. And, we're generally pretty conservative, Nick and me, but I guess it's Nick and I. I wasn't really sure about the grammar there. Anyway, I'm running out of steam, and we didn't really want to talk about this stuff forever, so let's move on. Nick, I think we can't let the occasion pass without talking about the discovery, frankly, the horrifying discovery in Kamloops, British Columbia, on the grounds of a residential school. And we'll talk about, for those of our, who are listening to us in our international audience, what the residential schools were all about. But apparently, this past week, they discovered the remains of 215 children on the grounds of this residential school. And, there's I guess a somewhat of a stunned silence about that. Not just because bad things happened at residential schools. We know this already. Were they as bad as, people were making out? Well, as one of those people that was a little bit skeptical, I have to tell you, I'm not prepared to swallow my words just yet, but it's pretty hard to deny something bad was going on when they find 215 bodies at one location. Now, I think it's important to remember we're talking about one location, but the whole thing is shrouded in confusion and mystery. So, setting aside for a minute the fact that it was a residential school, and just to put our international listeners into the picture, the residential schools, when we talk about these, were actually boarding schools that children from First Nations here in Canada in the 20s and 30s and 40s were sent to, in many cases, in some cases, if not many cases, they were forcibly sent to these schools that on the idea that we were going to that the country was going to, or the schools were going to bring these people, the children of these tribes, into the modern age, so to speak, teach them English, teach them geography, basically, bring them up to speed in Western culture, and not to, I don't want to say to completely eradicate their own indigenous culture, but certainly to suppress it and make it a secondary thing. So this was a policy. It was primarily a state policy, that is to say, a government policy. But these schools were, I don't know, Nick, is it fair to say that they were exclusively run by the Catholic Church, or just principally run?
From what I understand, the teachers and people like that were, for the most part, Catholic. The administration of it was done on the governmental level. This particular school was set up during the first Trudeau's reign, from 68 to 79 or whenever it was, and his Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs was Jean Chrétien. As a young minister, that was his portfolio. So how much culpability each party is due in this, I'm not sure exactly how much the church is guilty of, and I'm not trying to whitewash that. Like if some church is responsible in any real way in this, then they need to if they're still alive, if they're still with us, then they need to suffer the full extent of the law for this. But I'm not willing to say that they have it all. I think a large percentage of it should, and it's the one part of this conversation you don't hear about, who the political masters of the day were that made this possible in the first place. And I think that's where a lion's share of the responsibilities lie. And there's also been calls for investigations at every school of this nature across the country. Well, the problem with that is I don't trust, unless you found some kind of outside agency to do the investigating. This is like the fox investigating the fox who's in the hen house. Nothing to see here, no problems, carry on. You don't let the police investigate themselves. We have a special unit for that. You don't let. This would be a bad. I just don't trust them to do it right. I don't think they're going to do it fairly, and I don't think they'll bring those to justice who deserve it just as much as any member of the church does. So I don't know how I feel about that, because I want justice done. I don't like the idea of living in a country where this was allowed to happen. And just as an aside, I do find it remarkable, though, that people will get outraged about the death of 215 innocent children. And they should, don't get me wrong. But they never even lift a finger or cock an eyebrow at the death of tens of thousands of them before they even get a chance to draw their first breath. That, to me, is just the height of irony.
Right, and that's an excellent point. But I'm going to sidestep it a little bit, Nick, because I don't want to confuse the two issues. I think they're both very important, and I think you raise a very good point. You make a very good point. But I have to go back to the whole thing with this residential school. Now, what you're telling me is that from the research that you've been able to conclude, that this particular school, obviously not the residential school program, but that this particular school started operating when Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister and Jacques Chrétien, who was a former Prime Minister here in Canada as well, was the Minister for Indian Affairs. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Okay, see, I didn't know that. I assumed that the residential schools, if they hadn't ceased operation, that there were no new ones being opened at that time. So that is quite fascinating. We're not talking about ancient history here by any stretch of the imagination. But what I find really quite fascinating, I have to tell you, and deeply disturbing, is, one body, two bodies, 5 bodies is shocking enough. But 215 on one property? And my question is this, not just what happened there that so many children could die over, if it was that new, not that recent, it had to have been a fairly short period of time, because we don't have any of these schools anymore. So they were shut down some time ago. But not just that it could happen, Nick, but that, how do you cover this up? And of course, no pun intended, okay? How is this suppressed? How do 215 children die at one location and are buried at one location, and none of this seeps out into the media or into the community or anything like that? I mean, that's a pretty big and horrendous. I want to say I'm being restrained here, because in fairness, we don't know what happened, and so what we really need here is a full and, as you say, an independent investigation. Let's get at the truth of what happened here. But and that's me trying to be fair and trying to be, let's pursue justice to the nth degree, which means we have to have.